I'm
Gotcha.
ready.
Yeah.
All right. People can see us now. Hi. We're having a wave off. See who gets to be
Yeah.
last. I like your shirt there, Mike.
Yeah, what is this? 1D4 Con.
Yeah.
We missed 1D4. Well, so we were going to miss 1D4 Con, and then it got canceled. So
Right.
they're shooting for this year. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. I was in a Facebook conversation. Somebody was posting about the possibility of Gen Con, and like, well, let's say they have it, but they have some sort of mask policy. What are they going to do when people don't follow the policy? Gen Con is
They're not.
notoriously bad about not enforcing their own policies.
They're not having Gen Con.
Well, I live in Indiana, and the governor is trying to open everything up. So,
that's a
if
big mistake.
If the state has any
there's
say
like
in it,
opening up a barbershop, and there's opening up a 60,000 person convention.
Yeah, no, but that doesn't mean that. I mean, I'm sure the government would prefer to have it happening.
Yeah.
Whether it's a good idea or not, and whether or not the convention decides to do it, we'll see.
I listened in on the channel, and our audio levels sound good.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I should have checked to make sure that there wasn't an echo.
You have one viewer.
It's me. I'm looking at.
Hello, viewer.
It's just me.
Is it just you? What's your name?
DM Sam is here.
No, there's somebody in the list of users that's not you. Tresino, whoever that is. Hi, Tresino.
Oh yeah. There's a.
It's often wrong, that list, but
Yeah, it doesn't update very quickly.
oh,
Where do you see that list?
You can click the little meeple icon in the upper right
Oh.
in the chat.
yeah.
Oh, I see.
I find that both the viewer count number and the people in chat number, like the number of people there, have nothing to do with each other, and then none of them have anything to do with the summary that I get afterwards. So I just sort of like, I figure if they show up in the people in chat, then they're probably around or recently were, and I can at least say hi to them if I know who they are or whatever. But
Yeah.
all right, well, should we do this thing?
Yes. Let's do this.
Let me hit record on the audio. All right, we are recording. This is Behind the DM Screen. It is May 2020. We are 3 DMs helping each other out, talking about our games, and I didn't say any of that in the right order, but that's okay because this is Behind the DM Screen, and I don't write a script. So, I am Jeff Greiner, your usual Tome Show host, but also with us is Sam Dillon. Say hi, Sam.
So hi, Sam.
I am not wording well tonight. Also with us is Mike Shea. Say hi, Mike. All right, and that's it. That's the introduction. That's all you get. We are putting 15 minutes on the clock, so each of us has a chance to talk about our games. And Sam, you're up first. So whenever you'd like to start, tell us what you're playing.
Well, so unfortunately, the COVID issues, the pandemic issues right now have put the kibosh on my face-to-face game, and we are thinking of maybe going virtual with that one during. But right now, this is my group with the youngsters, so they're all still in high school too, and so. They don't already know how to use Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds or Discord or anything like that, and generally their parents do not let them have accounts like that sort of thing. So we don't have that set up right now. So I'm not playing my face-to-face game right now, which sucks. But I am still playing my D&DeBrief game. And that's a lot of fun, but I think I already said where we were last time we recorded. Did I say that? Because I mentioned, oh no, you know what? I know when I talked about it was on the D&D podcast. Oh. I mentioned it, right? So I will tell you what's up with that. But before I do that, I want to talk about the fact that there is a virtual convention occurring at the end of May. called Con of Champions, and I'm going to be running a game there, a game of Castles and Crusades, which is why Castles and Crusades is on my mind, Mike. And so that's going to be a lot of fun. They've worked really hard to try to get that set up. They ran a Kickstarter to keep it going because it takes a lot of server power and whatnot to do all of the scheduling. And they're a sort of event organization group or something. I'm not really sure exactly what the whole what everything around that is about, but there is a con, and it's a virtual con, and so if you are lacking in gaming, go to Con of Champions and check out what they've got going. There's some seminars, there's some games. You can have a weekend of gaming if you're short on gaming right now. I know a lot of people. I feel like there's this dichotomy. Everybody I talk to has either gamed way more than they normally do because everybody's at home, or not hardly at all because everybody's at home, and that includes a bunch of children. And it's hard to find time when suddenly you have to deal with young ones all the time. In fact, I think Tracy was lamenting that a couple of podcasts ago.
Yeah, Brandis was as well.
Yeah, Brandis is having a time too. Mm-hmm. So in any case, so if you're having issues there are lots of virtual cons that are coming up, even if you can't make it to the physical ones. So D&DeBrief. So that game is going really well. It had a couple of curveballs. What's happening is it's sort of winding up, and we're getting to where the clues are falling into place, and they're finally asking the right questions of the right people, or in some cases the right sentient artifacts, and they're learning all sorts of things. And what they just sort of discovered was whatever happened to make the plateau have the issue that it's having, where it's sinking underwater. That is a real problem because the plateau is a flat plateau, and there's borders on all four sides. And what they've discovered is the reason that the maps are incorrect is that the plateau is expanding, and so the islands in the plateau are being pushed apart, which sounds like it's not a big deal. If it was a globe, they would just go around and they'd crash into each other on the other side, make some mountain ranges and a big continent, except there's barriers on each edge of the planet. So depending on which direction you're moving, eventually you are going to run into one of the barriers. Either you're going to fall off a giant waterfall, or you're going to hit a huge set of cliffs, or you're going to go through a veil of acid streaming down from the height of, they can't even see the top of it, right? It's basically a giant acid waterfall. Or you're going to get stuck in an area called the doldrums, where the water moves so slowly everything stops, except oftentimes whirlpools form in the middle of some of those areas, which means the islands will get sucked into the waterfalls, or to the whirlpools.
Is this your own world, or is this a default?
This is my own setting.
It's cool.
He's talked about the whole plateau plane thing before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know the barriers.
Yeah, that's new information to me too.
Yeah. So I'm in the so the players got sort of a world document, and I mentioned it like in the first episode, but it never really came up before because they didn't do anything to get close to one of the barriers, so they haven't seen these barriers. It was sort of rumor up until then. Until they got some information the last couple of sessions, and they're starting to realize, oh, well, if our maps aren't correct, that must mean that things are moving, and things are moving. Because the problem is that what they've also learned is that reversing the sinking, that event that caused everything to sink, reversing that might have worse consequences than they think. Because you're not just like, going back in time and making it not happen. You're actually stopping it from its current trajectory and turning it backwards and making the reverse occur. Well, what do you have if you've had land covered with water for 50 years, and now you're going to take all that water and put it somewhere? That might not be the best, right? So they don't really know what's happening. But they know that there are some big consequences. But now they've got another consequence to think about, which is, well, if the world actually is expanding, but the barriers are not expanding, that means that everything in the world that's expanding out is going to eventually hit a barrier. And so they recently learned about, they found this artifact called the Book of Proofs, and they've learned now who wrote the Book of Proofs, and that has pointed them in the direction of seeking out a particular arcane scholar. And so that's kind of where we are. And I think this is what I mentioned on the fitness podcast, was the duel never happened because what they figured out was Sharkface, the pirate who proposed the duel, who actually challenged the Lutrinian royalty, is defecting from the pirate ship. He's defecting from the pirate fleet because he was human, and he went through a transformation to make him into a wereshark, and it worked. And his transformation did not destroy him, and now he's getting better and better at controlling it, so he can control what form that he takes. He doesn't just get, he doesn't just suddenly spontaneously transform as if he can't control it. He actually can control it. And his brother was going through a similar transformation process, but it didn't turn out as well, and he started dying. And that's also what happened to a lot of this guy's crew. And so he decided, screw this, I'm going to defect. I'm going to get away from the pirate fleet, because the pirate fleet is who sort of wrangled us all into this and tried to make us, go through these transformations so that we could get all this power and follow Laralac, the main villain guy. And he was defecting, and what he thought, he was trying to rescue his brother, and he thought if he challenged the Lutrinian to a duel and retrieved the royal sword, that he could then trade that for his brother. That was his whole plan. But then what happened was, as they discovered that he was trying to defect, because his second in command, who was negotiating the terms of the duel, basically told the party what was happening. And then they all got attacked. They got attacked by a bunch of storm wyverns and a bunch of deep scions, and there was a huge battle. And that's basically the roundup of where we are. The campaign is so much fun, but it's winding up, and I have figured out that one of the things that occurs, and this is kind of what I wanted to sort of talk about, because I think it might be interesting to the audience, because everybody is moving more virtual nowadays. But one of the things that occurred is, because I'm streaming, and I'm streaming for the purposes of turning it into a podcast. So I don't want to go image heavy on it, because you can't say on a podcast, hey, look at this image. I do that a couple of times in some of the episodes when there's a map, and then I attach it to the show notes so somebody could go and look at it if they want. But ultimately, I can't really do that, right? Like, you can't. That would be a really boring podcast. Hey, look at this. Let's point over there. Hey, that's just not how it works. So I don't use a lot of images. But what that's done is it's made this campaign such that there just aren't that many battles. So even though I do theater of the mind, the first couple of battles that we had in this campaign, now we've had, I think, like 19 or 20 sessions, 19 or 23-hour sessions. It's been going on for almost a year now. But the first couple of battles, it was really like everybody had a hard time wrapping their head around the theater of the mind thing without a lot of maps and all that. But by the time we got to this battle on the ship with the storm wyverns and the deep scions and the crew on the ship plus Sharkface, the pirate, and so it was this huge battle, but I had learned how to better represent the positions of everyone so that my players could more easily follow along. But then we talked about it afterwards, and basically it came out that it's really interesting because we're just a not very combat heavy game. And so that's something that I think I didn't expect that sort of evolution to happen. And I didn't set out and plan that. It's just that that's what happened. And I don't know if it's just because of the style that I run the game in, or if it's the players, or some confluence of those things put together, or if it's because I'm doing it for a podcast and I'm trying to not rely on images at all and rather describe imagery, So I guess I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Do they mind?
No, they're loving it.
So when they had the conversation about combat, did they lament not having as much combat as they would like?
No, I don't think so.
Good with it.
Yeah,
sounds like it's not a problem.
And I can tell you as a listener, the only reason I have noted that it's not a very combat heavy campaign is because you've pointed it out a few times. If you hadn't said anything, I don't think it would have occurred to me that was what was going on.
Okay.
So
I think that one thing that sort of dawned on me now, running a lot of Theater of the Mind, because I I'm have to is a little extreme, but the style of online play that I've chosen, the tools I've chosen for online play, mean that there's no real way for me to do gridded tactical combat. I've noted, and I remember in my talking to Lauren Urban from D&D Beyond about it, and she did a show with Todd Kendrick where she talked about it, that like Theater of the Mind, the battles that do best in Theater of the Mind are simple ones. Mm-hmm. Right? They work really well when it's two ogres versus the party in an area with maybe a feature in it that you could represent. Right. And positioning doesn't matter too much, and there aren't really any terrain tactics. Mm-hmm. It works well, and I know that I lean more towards those kinds of confrontations now in my own game because I know they'll be easier for me to describe, which I think has the side effect of being not particularly interesting, which means it's okay that we don't have as many of them. So I think there's this kind of cycle about the style and so
I think
I don't know.
I think I've come to a similar over the last few years. I think I've come to a position in my own just style of play where I, as the DM, I just really enjoy the role playing and exploration pieces a lot more than I do the combat piece. So if they try a non-combat way to resolve something, I usually try to make it feasible, because that's more interesting to me, So if we did very little combats, that would be fine with me. That said, I know my players like it, and I think particular players really like it and have really enjoyed the fact that since we've been online, we're playing through Roll20, and that means they have a map for every combat, whereas before it was 50-50 Theater of the Mind or mapped. So
so I ran a poll asking people, and I ran it twice, once in 2017 and once in 2018, and the one in 2018 got 2,100 responses about which of the three pillars people enjoy, and combat was the least liked of the three pillars. It was 60% preferred role-playing, 23% exploration, and 18% combat.
But those people who like the combat really like it. So
they do, right? And I think
I think that for my party, I think there's one guy who would prefer a little bit more combat, but I think he's also okay with the game the way it is because he's having fun. But the other thing that I do is I'm really, really flexible with how they, if they build a character, if they level up and they pick something and then it just doesn't get used as much as what they thought, or it doesn't fit their character concept as well as what they thought, I just let them change it. It's not a big deal. I go, oh, you wanted that instead? No big deal. I don't care about that. So that's one, I think, that sort of alleviates that pressure of, if you have a PC in the party that is built for basically optimized combat and only optimized combat, and they're not really good at anything else, and they don't want to be, you might have a problem. But my players didn't do that, so I think it's probably okay.
I've seemed to manage to filter those people out of my games, right? In the 4 groups I have going now, none of them. There are definitely people who have combat things that they like. They like combat, but they're also really good. They have backgrounds and understanding of their characters, and they have lots to do in lots of different scenes. So there's people who certainly, I don't think anybody doesn't like combat, but there's certainly, I don't have anybody who's focused on that, waiting for the scene to go to combat because they're bored. So,
I have some play. I think I have 1.5, 2 players that prefer the combat pillar. And that's not as heavy as they were expecting necessarily in the campaign, and it's become a bit of a thing. In fact, I'll talk about it on my turn. But But yeah, so
I think
it's a thing.
it's also kind of funny because like what Mike just said about the combats they tend to get boring, so then he doesn't do as much of them. It's funny because I kind of have done the opposite. The past couple of combats they've had have been these big sort of main event kind of combats, like the ship with the wyverns and the deep scions and all that, and a lot of stuff going on. And it basically took almost the whole session because it was so complex, but it still went fast and smooth, and it didn't seem like, oh God, it's dragging on forever, you know? And the one before that, also the first time they met Leralak was the similar way where it was the set piece scene. But what happens is they stop and they role play like in the middle with, oh, well, what does it look like over here? You know, because they're now so used to interacting with the world that way that it just becomes a natural part of the combat as well. But yeah, I kind of agree and I kind of disagree. I kind of agree. Yeah. If I felt like I had to have at least one combat every session, it would just be a bunch of really quick, boring ones that would feel meaningless. Right. But because I don't, because I have them very much fewer times than I otherwise would maybe at a table. Look, in my face-to-face game, my players love combat because it's very concrete. Here are the rules. Here's what you have to do. The role-playing is a lot harder for them, but I think that's more of an effect of them being new to D&D and being very young players.
Right.
So that's kind of a different thing. But yeah, so anyway, sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. And for the record, I, for whatever reason, rather than using the timer, I used the stopwatch, but that's why the alarm hasn't gone off. You're at 18 minutes, so you know.
18 minutes.
We always go over, so I'm not, whatever.
Outrageous.
But coming from Mike.
Now Mike's gonna demand 20 minutes.
Exactly.
Well, that's it. I just wanted to mention that because I think it's one of the interesting things that's sort of fallen out of that. And we talk about it a lot. I switched to doing debrief episodes of 1 hour. So now we have we're still sort of figuring out our format, but it's going to be like 1 hour with maybe 10 or 15 minutes of debrief on each episode now. But for about 5 episodes now, it's only going to be just 1 hour of game. And then it'll be a big debrief at the end. But we talk about this a lot because it turns out that, right, a lot of the rules in D&D are just focused on combat. And so when you don't do a lot of combat, it feels like there's a lot of stuff you're not experiencing. But yet that's kind of it's like a FOMO, right? It's the fear of missing out, but really you're not actually missing anything because you're still having fun. I don't know. Anyway.
GM Scott 2 in our Twitch chat said that in their experience watching streams, it's more entertaining and interesting as a viewer to watch RP and exploration than it is to watch tactical combat. Yeah, I don't know if that's affecting it or not, but I think that's I don't watch too many streaming games, but
that holds up for me.
Yeah.
I listened to a decent number of them as podcasts, and it is not uncommon for if somebody's got a 2-hour combat going on or whatever, which sometimes happens. I start to lose interest real fast, and every now and then I'll even just fast forward to the end of the combat to find out how it turns out.
Yeah, I don't watch Critical Role regularly, but I will sometimes kind of just pop it open to see what's going on in there. And there was one where clearly his characters are getting into the teens in their levels. I think they're pretty high level, and he was running a battle, and I could see the shenanigans that the characters are pulling off, and I could see him getting more and more exasperated at how things. And I'm like, man, even Matt Mercer, right? It's good to know that he's still with the stunning and the pocket prone and the backstab and the It's so funny, all the weird little triggers that occur even in fifth, which is way ridiculous to be. Still,
right.
When you get into the teens, there's a lot of shenanigans.
Yep.
All right, so Sam, you're good?
Thank you.
All right, very good. So I will just take a break real quick to let people know that if you want to support the show, there's a few ways you can do it. I want to recommend, if you want to support the show directly, you can go to patreon.com/The Tome Show. That money goes directly to helping pay the bills and that kind of stuff that keeps the show going. And I want to thank people who do that, such as Merrick Blackman, Jill Sanders, Leonard Pelche, and Doug Palmer. At least one of those people are hang out in our Tome Show Discord, which if you tweet at me at The Tome Show or email me, thetomeshow@gmail.com, I will send you the link for that, and you can come and join us.
I tweeted you.
I saw, but I'm in the middle of recording a podcast, so I didn't want to get distracted.
So you said tweeted you, and you need a link and here I am. Oh, Link, I'm ready to talk.
I'll get to it later. Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
Are you busy?
Something's going on.
Here, I'm gonna put it in the chat.
Great, and I'll click.
There it is in the chat.
There we go. I got my invite. There we go.
Well, don't get too busy doing that, right? Oh, you already joined.
Now I'm hanging out in Discord.
It's your turn to talk. 15 minutes, Mike. Talk about your game.
All right. So I am running. Well, so I am in Sam's category of lots more D&D than I was having when we weren't all at home. So I now have 4 regular-ish games going on, 2 that are weekly, and 2 that are basically every 2 or 3 Saturdays of the month. And so I'm running 2 Eberron games, 1 Avernus game, and 1 Midgard game. But I'm going to talk about the Eberron games because they're the ones where I need the most help, and I am running them the most often. So that is, these are Eberron homebrew games. Mm-hmm. The characters are in Sharn. The general theme of the game is that some number of factions are trying to build or acquire a weapon similar to the one that caused the Mourning, mm-hmm. the destruction of the entire, not a continent, but an entire country, right. Essentially, of Sire. And so there's lots of intrigue. I'm trying to do all of the Eberron things that one should do. I'm using a pulp narrative. I'm using a lot of I'm stealing a lot of scenes from all the kinds of movies that the game is built on.
Are they fighting on swinging platforms over lava and riding lightning rails?
No, they did fight gnolls that rode in on floating disc surfboards being carried by a manticore. Okay. That was pretty pulp. Yeah. They're going like to the highest peaks. They had a dinner party for a gold ring member of the Aurum, who's like this big society of influential people. And then that got jumped by gnolls. The gnolls all work for a monstrous criminal organization known as the Dask, and now they're involved with the Dask. They broke into an old ruined temple in order to acquire a book called the Tome of Making, which is one of the primers that the House Kenneth used to start making their artifacts and their Warforged and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of intrigue. And the hard part is like releasing enough of the information that the players are still know they're going somewhere, but not so much that it's like getting right to the end. And I'm leaving a lot of blanks on purpose. So like, I don't know what the weapon actually is. I kind of have some ideas, but I have more than one idea, and I don't know what it is they're doing. But I also like, the problem was when that wasn't concrete, then a lot of the MacGuffins and a lot of the other sort of plot drivers aren't concrete either. So which means I'm giving these like fuzzy ass plot hooks that like the players are like, why are we at the dinner party? Like, what do we want? Like, find out something about this guy? Well, like what? So it's been harder to sort of narrow down and say like, your job at this dinner party is to find where Vito Skull's secret vault is and get into it and see what he's got down there. Like something is, I didn't give that, but that should have been the drive that I was trying to do. So they did go into, they had a fun, so they had a dinner party. That one, I ran it for two groups, and it was kind of okay for both, but I learned a lot about running dinner parties. And then I'm like, gnolls, right? I'm like, just hurl gnolls into the windows. And now the dinner party becomes something pretty interesting. And then they got into the vault and they hung out in Leto Skull's vault, and there were doors that they couldn't get through. So they're like, we learned things about the vault. We know he's got something in there. But we couldn't get it. And then they got out, and then they met with their patron. And one character, in one group's case, their patron is a dragon-marked House Thrask person who runs the Finders Guild. So it's perfect, like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Right. I could have sent questions to forever anything. The other one is the uncle of one of the characters, who's a dragon-marked member of House Kenneth, who is worried that House Kenneth was responsible for the Mourning and wants to make sure it doesn't happen again. So he had a good sit down with the players that said, look, I'm an old man. I can't solve this, but I'm worried that we caused the Mourning. And I'm worried that if we're not careful, it could happen again. And I want to stop that from happening. So then the players are like, yeah, we'll help you stop it from happening. So that was good. That kind of solidified things. So then the most recent one is like they got out from the vault, and I said, okay, here are some options for you. Like, here are different things you could do. You could go to Tower 6 of Morgrave University, where supposedly down in the Forbidden section, they are holding another tome called the Tome of Kol Sir, which is like the reverse of the Tome of Making. It's a tome of dark magic that was captured and recorded from the Giants of Zendrek. And we know it's down there. And we also know that other people want that one because there was a group that wanted the Tome of Making. So we want to get down there and get it before anybody else does. Two, we know that Leto Skal, who's this like sinister member of the Aurum, hired an expedition to go to Zendrek. And the ships that did the expedition came back, but like it was basically just left in dock and nobody actually came off of it. And people don't want to go near it, and there's like weird stuff going on in that ship. So you might want to investigate the ship and see if you can learn more about this expedition. Or you, by the way, a member of House Dask, or not House Dask, the Dask monster group, they would like to meet with you. They are, they know about what happened at the house, but at the dinner party, but they have information that will be valuable to you, and you have information that'll be valuable to them, and they want to meet with you down in the cogs. However, getting down there is going to be hard. It's not like you don't have a full invitation. Just walk through the cogs. Right. You're going to have to make your way to us.
So you're kind of using the three hooks method, right?
Yeah.
Throw three things out and see where they go.
Throw 2 or 3. Yeah, I wanted to do that. I didn't want to railroad them down any one path. And so and I had some different sort of side quests for the different groups. So like one group, I had a player where I offhand, this is such a perfect thing. I offhand mentioned that down in the Fallen, which is like an area where there's a bunch of ruined temples. He said, "Is there any other temples down here besides the one we're going to?" And I said, "Yeah, there's one to the Temple of Balinor that has like a big lion and a panther statue outside, but the entrance looks like it's collapsed." And he's like, "I am really interested in that." And I was like, "Okay." And so like he would ask every NPC, like, "Do they know anything about the Fallen Temple of Balinor?" And I'm like, "No, they don't." And he's like, "Does she know anything about the Fallen Temple?" And so finally I said, like, "No, but she'll investigate it and get back to you." And then I came back and I'm like, well, I've got to do something with this because it's like a player grabbed onto a hook. Why would I not go with it, right? This is what I write about. This is what I talk about all the time. Player-driven D&D. So I made a Temple of Balinor and I made like a little storyline. And then I threw it out as like, hey, there's all these hooks. Plus, by the way, we found the secret entrance to the Temple of Balinor if you're interested in that. And he's like, I want to do that. And the other player's like, sure, let's go do that. Like, we could take a break. So I'm like, all right. Temple Balinor it is. And so I ran that on Sunday, and that went really well. Like, I was really worried that like it's for one player, no one else cares, it's a bunch of just dungeon crap. And then I was like, what if the Emerald Claw is already in there and they're using it like as an undead node? They like twisted the magic of the temple to this like undead node so they can learn more about what the Emerald Claw is doing as part of this whole operation. So that worked out really well, and the player got a nice magic item that'll grow with him as he grows as a character, and so that worked out really well. My other group is going. They decided to go to the docks and investigate this ship that came back, and then one of my players is like, "Oh my god!" Like I think even he said, "Sure, that's fine," and then like yesterday, he's like, "Didn't we play a whole campaign on boats? Like we just literally played all of Saltmarsh, and now we're going back to a freaking boat." And I was like, "Oh man. I can't make this boat like a normal boat." So I was like kind of going through the book. And again, I'm trying to like squeeze all I can out of Eberron, right? I'm like, what would make the boat Eberron-y? And then I thought like, well, there's this whole thing about the quarry and the plane of Dalquar, I think it's called Dalquar, which is the dream plane. And there's these creature called the Quarry, I think they're called, that are like these dream monsters. And they got into a war with the Giants of Zendrek. And the Giants actually, the Kol Sir, the leader of these arcane giants, pulled a moon down out of the world. This is folklore, but maybe some of it's true. And he destroyed them. And then later on, his own elven slaves revolted against him. And he was going to bring all the moons down and destroy the elves. And that's when Auron, another god, and the dragons of Argonessen came to Zendrek and wiped him out. So I was like, what if I kind of tied that lore in there, that there's a Zendrek magic, but what if the Zendrek magic is actually built on quarry magic and it's weird dreamscape magic, right? And some of that, when they brought this huge crystal, they brought a huge dragon shard from Zendrak back to Sharn. The characters know about this already, and they know it was on that boat. But what if there was, and I always said, like, there's a hand. There was like this weird hand inside the middle of this 2,000-pound Eberron dragon shard. What if the hand was a quarry hand, and the Zendrak giants were using it for power, and some of their new magic came from the quarry that they had defeated, and it bled out into the ship like radiation when they were hauling it over across the way. So when the characters go to the ship, they will start to basically get pulled into the dream world because it's manifested around this ship. And they could start having these like really weird experiences. And then I thought, like, what if I took Memento, the movie Memento, and there's another game, there's a computer game called, shucks, I can't remember the name of it. But it's about an investigation that a ship comes into shore and there's a murder investigation that you're trying to figure out everything that happened on the ship. And I was like, what if you tell the story in reverse order? So while they're on the ship, they're picking up clues, but every time they pick up a clue, they actually go to the scene and they're suddenly thrown in the middle of it. But they're all happening in reverse order. So the first scene is them coming on board as mercenaries hired by Leto Skal to bring the crystal off, and they're immediately attacked by like ghouls and undead that are on the ship. And then they defeat that, and then they kind of come back to the ship and they go a little bit further, and then they hear about how the crew started to eat themselves while they were coming across the sea, that the crystal was manifesting and it was coming across the sea. And then it's their expedition into Zendrak, and it's their recovering the crystal from the ziggurat where it was. And they can actually see those scenes firsthand and have encounters firsthand in all of those places as their own characters who got pulled into this like dreamscape version of what happened. Each time they're learning more about what this expedition was like and the thing that actually got pulled out. So that's what I think I'm going to be running. That's tomorrow.
I don't think I've talked about it here, but I did talk about it on a recent review episode where we did a bunch of PDFs. And I talked about something that I'm bringing into Curse of Strahd called the Interactive Tome of Strahd from DM's Guild. And it's a similar idea where you don't just get a handout and here's a single page sort of background of Strahd. Instead, as you decipher each chapter, it then magically draws you into a scene in the past and you live through as characters in moments of the life of Strahd. And it sort of sounds like what you're talking about, except it doesn't go backwards. But, you know, you're doing these little vignettes.
I need to figure out like how to have... I don't know if I can either have it go backwards or I'm going to like drop, you know, a dozen or so clues onto this boat, like objects, you know, like a thing. And then when they interact with the thing, that's what draws them into that scene.
Yeah.
And they can maybe even give them the option of like which sort of scene, you know, maybe the thing gives them enough of a clue that they say like, yeah, this is one we want to do. And then they get a choice of essentially like 4 scenes to play out, you know, that they know will draw them in. And I love this in my head. I have this vision that they go onto the ship, and the minute they like go up on deck, they're like, the ship is sitting in the middle of this wasteland dreamscape where the sky is roaring overhead and like towers are crumbling all around them. And like, you know, other ones are getting built up like freaking Inception, you know, like the world around them is just like a giant sandcastle that's getting torn up and built down, and that they can see like, what are those called? The Sorrowsworn, the Sorrowsworn from the Shadowfell.
Oh, okay.
They'll see those things like walking around the ground, right? These like beings who live in this world. And so they'll realize like, oh my God, where are we?
Those guys are so creepy, and
they're creepy, and they're also like,
they're
horrendously nasty to fight.
Yeah.
So you don't want to fight one of them because they're like CR11, you know, but maybe they'd fight one and maybe it's like, wow, that was really hard. Like, you know, we beat it, but it was really hard. And so, yeah, there's, you know, you could have like all this, the dreamscape manifest, and then they know they're here, and their goal is we got to get out of here. But the only thing that can let them out is one of these quarry, and it has to know that they're going to help it, right? So I'm still playing with these ideas. I got to get them, you know, I got 20 hours to get it ready.
Right. Well, and it sounds like that's really the crux of where you're at is you're at a point now where you've got a lot of fuzzy things, and as a result, it means that like the players aren't real focused, and it's probably time to start nailing those things down and figure out where you're going.
Right. I'm playing both sides. I'm playing like I go back and forth. Like I know that I want them to go to the Mournland, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got a bunch of things in the Mournland that I think would be cool. So like I think I for one group, one of the players is a Warforged who is tied to the becoming god, right? He's tied to this like the new Warforged god. And I know I want to have like other Warforged that are like him that think that they can sort of build their own god inside the Mournland. And yet they're being attacked by the Lord of Blades, who thinks that that's the opposite of what he wants to do. And so I want to have this like good, the bad, and the ugly sort of or fistful of dollars sort of stuff of defend the town from the Lord of Blades. I guess that's more Seven Samurai. So I want to throw like that in there. I want to have. I really like the idea of a Warforged train that's insane, which I'm stealing right out of Stephen King.
Right.
And that train knows how to get to the place where the laboratory where they built the weapon. And it's the only thing that can get you there. And it's crazy and you have to deal with it. So I have these like ideas for scenes I want to run, but I don't have any order to them. And I don't really have sort of ins and outs. I'm sort of encapsulating these adventure ideas, which I'm throwing in a box, and then I'll sort of pull them out as we go. And I also want to remember and not focus on the fact that like I don't have a campaign script and I don't have a campaign adventure that I'm running. I can really build this around the characters, right? And I really want to do that. I want to make sure that I'm tying into the backgrounds of the characters and I'm giving them major, like they built themselves around the plot, Eberron and everything else, but I want to make sure that like I'm really drawing their stuff in, like NPCs they meet or NPCs that are clearly right out of their background, And I want to constantly reinforce that. And that's it's tricky to do even when the campaign is your own.
Although I would argue I've been doing that very heavily in my current Dragon Heist into Curse of Strahd campaign as well. And I have notes there. I was going to mention some of the ways I've been doing that actually just recently. I've got 2 Aasimar characters, and Aasimar inherently have this like guardian angel sort of that gives them advice every now and then. Well, I've worked in that in really intimate ways.
You stop the timer on this, right?
Your timer ran out a minute ago, so yeah.
Oh, well, this is negative time then. I'm going backwards in my own.
When I talk, you get more time.
He's reclaiming the time like we're in the Senate or something.
Yeah. Reclaiming his time.
All right, continue talking about your game.
No, go ahead. I said what I wanted to say. Okay.
So, I mean, it's a really interesting time. It's different for me because I'm running multiple campaigns that are completely homebrewed. And I like it, but it's also a struggle in a different way.
Well, and it's interesting because you said you've got 4 games going now, and I'm used to you having 2 games going that are more or less the same, but following their own paths, like your 2 Eberron games are, right? But you just said you're also doing a Midgard game and
Midgard and Avernus, yeah.
And Avernus, yeah. And I'm curious to hear about those, although I'm sure I'll hear plenty about your Avernus game because I'm gonna run it soon, and then you'll get to tell me all about what happened when you did it. So.
Oh man, yeah. I'll give you the big hint, which is do your homework before you start.
Oh yeah.
The adventure needs work.
Well, I've got the big giant Beetle and Grimm box that provides some extra things too. So
start. Yeah.
I have ideas.
We'll see. Look at Fall into Elturel.
Already got it.
Yeah, that's a great adventure. It's a great way to start.
Yep, I've got that one, and then there's another one that sort of brings them from Elturel to Baldur's Gate, and then
that's an Adventures League one. I think does that.
And then I also picked up the Helturel, so I've got a bunch of different things to supplement those early.
You'll do fine. I found like the approach that I took really immediately solved like a couple of major problems that the introduction of the adventure had.
Yeah.
Well,
I originally, I mean, when we did our original review of it, it was clear that like one of the places where there's a gap in the adventure is getting that initial hook. Like, why do they necessarily care, right? So I decided way back then, and I think it's still going to hold up, that I'm going to have every single one of my players be a Hellrider or descended from a Hell Rider or whatever, and that's it. You're done. You know,
connected to the Hell Riders, and it works so well.
Yeah,
and it works really well with Fallen Terrell because the Hell Riders are right there. And
right. Well,
that was such a stronger hook, and it made the whole intro way easier.
Yep. So that was going to be my plan too. So very good.
I'm all done.
Excellent. Yeah, we're mostly talking about other stuff now anyway, so that's fine. If people, I mentioned before, if you want to support us, you can do so by joining us on Patreon. And in fact, while we've been sitting here talking, Scott Nagel has become a patron. So welcome to the Patreon, Scott. I'm gonna give Mike credit for that because he posted the link in the chat room on the Twitch. So I don't know if Scott's in the Twitch or not, but or if it's just coincidence, but.
You mean Sam?
Oh, Sam posted it. So, I give the wrong person credit. Thank you, Sam.
No. I posted the Discord and Mike posted the.
Okay.
Yes.
But one of the other ways you can support the show is by going shopping at Amazon and DM's Guild. If you go to thetomeshow.com, there are links to Amazon and DM's Guild there. And you can go shopping just like you always would and have the exact same experience, but we get a little bit. I spread the Amazon affiliate money out to all of the people who contribute to the show, including Sam and Mike, and then the DM's Guild stuff gets used to buy PDF products that we then include in our mini reviews when we get a chance to do PDF mini reviews. And while we had this conversation, we've now had another patron join. So welcome Stephen Maloney. So also on board there. Excellent. So that makes it my turn. I'm going to put 15 minutes on the clock for me. So I don't know that I'm in either of the category in terms of quarantine has led to more or less gaming, but we have kept our weekly game going nonstop without a single week missed. If anything, we maybe play a little bit longer because people don't have the time to drive home at the end of the night. So, whereas we normally end at 10:30, sometimes it's more like 11 lately and whatever. So it's not a huge gain. And yet I feel like we got a ton done. Since the last time we've chatted, my group has run, Gleam in the King's Eye from Sly Flourish's Fantastic Adventures. We also ran Challenge of the Fang from Tales of the Old Margrave, and just finished that last Friday session, and that transitioned us into Curse of Strahd. So I've kind of hit 3 different adventures since in the last month. Gleam in the King's Eye went really well. I was using it as an opportunity to highlight, to give us some spotlight time to a character who didn't really feel very connected to the story. In fairness, it was the character it was the player who decided to change characters right after I gave their previous character like a massive hook to the story. And I'm like, well, if you're just going to abandon your characters whenever I give you a storyline reason for being here, I might be a little more hesitant to do that. But so he had actually contacted me, said, hey, I'd like to have more things to do outside of just combat. I'd like to have more connections. And so I'm like, oh, this will be fine. His old uncle, who was never much of a fighter type, was part of an adventuring group that was hired to go into the catacombs or whatever under the estate first, and none of them came out. So now you've got to go in and find your uncle. Also, by the way, these nobles, and I use the Van Thampers from Descent into Avernus as a cameo, so that when they see him in the next campaign, they'll be, oh, I remember those people. And Duke Van Thamper sent I forget his name now, the oldest son, the one who's like the scrawny little one that has the puzzle box, but is not the heir. Like, she passed him completely and went to the second one, the second oldest, to become the heir. And so he's sort of the neglected one. She actually sent him down into the into the catacombs with them to sort of prove himself. And it all went really well. The adventure played well. We did the whole thing. It was a nice, like, one session adventure, which worked out just about perfect for everything we were doing. The one thing that got tricky is the one character that we were spotlighting was also prone to being really reckless. Like in a previous session, we had the what was Firewatch Island? What's that adventure? Tamarot's Fate. Mike had suggested it, right? And so I ran that.
Yep.
Yeah, I ran that, and they were preparing for the invasion. They spent 2 hours preparing for the swarm, the horde of undead to come that night. And then as soon as they did, this player's character just charged straight forward and destroyed all of that planning that they had done. Like, suddenly the planning didn't mean anything because he just decided to charge full steam ahead. He was very reckless. So he got to the room in Gleam in the King's Eye where there's an Aranes trapped in a circle. And he's all, and you know, the Aranes is, I'll give you this, I'll give you that. What do you want? Just all you have to do is break this free, and I'll get to go home, and I won't bother anybody ever again. Ha ha ha! Right? And one of the characters is a tiefling who's actually from Dis, and she's like, yeah, no. If there's a devil offering to make you a deal, don't ever do that. That's never a good idea, right? I'm from Dis. I've been through this. It's never gonna turn out well for you. And everybody sort of agreed, and then this one character, who was the spotlight character for the adventure, decided, oh no, I'm going to go ahead and break the circle. I made a deal, I'm going to go break the circle. And they tried to stop him at the last minute, and they actually attacked him to stop him. And I'm like, okay, well, they're just going to knock him out or whatever, so we can't do this thing, drag him along, finish the adventure, and drag him out and give him a scolding too, right? No, they knocked him to 0 and then let him bleed out. And I'm like, what? What are you doing? So normally I'm not a big, I don't appreciate, player versus player in my campaigns. And I particularly don't like it when you actually kill the other player's who was the spotlight character for the current adventure that you're in, right?
Yeah.
So it was a whole thing. And I spent the next week on our group Discord channel, navigating all of that. And it turns out, a lot of the other players have a problem with the style of play that player has been using, character aside, because there's been 2 characters in a row where that's been kind of problematic. And I'm like, well, I wish any of you had talked to me about it, because I recognize those problems too, and I was trying to work with them on it. I was trying to tie him to the story so he didn't feel so reckless and so disconnected and whatever. So we made a new character for him, and he took it all in stride. He's like, that's fine, no big deal. I like making new characters. So he's like, I'll just make a character. I want it to be a drow. I want it to be a sorcerer. That's all I really know. And I'm like, well, let's do a little more, right? And so I worked with him, and we came up with a fairly complex backstory that is intimately connected to Curse of Strahd and all the things that are going on, right? So he's a drow, but he's not really a drow. We just sort of reskinned drow and made it a dusk elf, which are the types of elves in Curse of Strahd, right? So instead of dusk elves being wood elves, they're actually drow now in my setting, because it fit what he wanted to do, right? He was adamant he wanted to play a drow. Okay, we can make that work, right?
So Jeff, hold on. We
yeah.
have a couple questions from the chat.
Okay.
So GM Scott 2 asks, how well do you know the players? And then Half Mist asks, how do you handle the conflict between players when combat between the players or PCs happens?
So
do you make it a duel, or how did you actually run that official combat?
So I don't know the players super well, but I mean, I've been playing with him since last summer. That's how well I know him, right? Every week since last summer. So decently well, but it's not like we're all bosom buddies necessarily, right? In terms of how I handled the combat, we were already in initiative order, so we just went in initiative order. They took whoever wanted to take their action took their action. It wasn't like there was a particular challenge, no, don't do this, or else we're going to fight to the death or whatever. It was well, I keep moving to break the circle. Well, I blast him with my Eldritch Blast to try to stop him, and that's more or less how it went down. So the Warlock blasted him with the Eldritch Blast. The other character didn't quite die and went ahead and broke the circle, and then the Bard came in and finished him off with another spell. In fact, I think he may have actually been killed by a vicious mockery or something, which is always the best way to die, to be mocked to death. So yeah, and I was prepared. I had plans in place for where this character was going to go and what we were going to do with them to try to connect this player to it some more. And I talked to each of the players individually through our Discord the week afterwards, and we did a lot of sort of unpacking of what happened and all of that. And I even I've been doing this this opening question every session where I sort of ask a role-playing based question, right? How did you feel about this? Or what did you guys talk about during this time? Or whatever kind of thing, right? And that's how they get inspiration at the beginning of every session. And I was like, and I sent a message to a group that was everybody except that one player. And I'm like, so how would you feel about like, hey, the opening question is, it's been a few days, you're all drinking late at night, and you all had a few words to say, maybe some remorseful, maybe some angry, whatever, about what went down with this character who died, right? And one of the players was like, yeah, no, I'm personally not ready to have that conversation because I'm still kind of mad at the other player for even putting us in that position. Like, he just refused to listen to any of the warnings of the rest of the players. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's do another thing, right? Let's instead make it about, hey, this group of adventurers oftentimes describes them as their sort of chosen or second family. What is it about the group that, so it's something a little more binding but uplifting as well, is the way I went. And I thought maybe that would help as well. So, but I think a lot of what I tried to come out from that is, okay, so you're going to make a new character. Let's lay down some ground rules because there are some things that your previous characters have done that have kind of bothered other people. So let's address that and make sure that the new character is not going to be that way, because it might come to a point where we got to start asking people to exit from the game. And I'm not super comfortable doing that because he was already in the game before I was. So I joined this group that was already formed. So I feel weird kicking people out. So, Mike, what did I not
answer?
People...
No, I was just giving crap. What did the two players, were both players in this group before you got there?
All of the players were in this group before I got there, except two, and both of these two that were involved were both there before me.
Okay, so the two people that killed where they got into PvP,
yeah,
they were both in this group before. Had they done something like this before?
So as I was talking to other people, talking about with the members of the group afterwards. One of the Warlock player who took the first blast against the other PC was like, oh, I see this kind of stuff in games all the time. And I'm like, well, that's not the way I usually do my games and whatever. And he's like, yeah, but he's got these behaviors that are very different styles of play from what the rest of us are doing. And like, I get that. And our last DM would like encourage it. Like the last DM would like actively like goad this player into doing reckless things that would cause problems with the rest of the group. I'm like, well, just know that that's not me, and I was actually working with him to tie his character more in so that he wouldn't be so reckless. The good news is that we got a hard restart, right? So the new character so far doesn't have any of those problems and is intimately tied to what the characters are doing, and it isn't nearly as reckless.
So the guy who got killed was the one doing the reckless stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. And did he seem to mind?
He seemed okay with it, but
okay.
I also... Like
he's had his opportunity to crack the system, and now he's happy.
Well, I don't know about that. I think he's just he's happy to play and he's happy to make characters, whatever. He's also the youngest, and there's issues there, and I don't want him to feel like other people are like piling on him,
right?
Because that's not fair to him as a person. Forget the game, and I don't want to kick somebody out because they have issues that they don't have any control over. So we're trying to make it work. And so far, the new character, I mean, I spent probably hours with him that week helping him craft this character and this backstory, because he has a tendency to not craft any backstory, like bare minimum just to justify making the mechanical combination he wants. And so I worked a lot with him to sort of take that mechanical combination and let me ask you this question, let me ask you that, let's flesh this out a little bit. Ooh, maybe we could do something like that, right? And so I probably wrote about half of it with him, So,
right.
But I feel good about where he's at now, and I'm hopeful that it's going to be okay moving forward. We'll see what happens.
Right.
So, Anyway, that was 13 minutes, and I didn't even talk about Challenge of the Fang or getting into Curse of Strahd. After that, we ended up doing challenge. There was a time jump. There was like a 3-month time jump, and we did a whole bunch of downtime. I was really busy on Discord that week because we did all the downtime stuff off camera outside of the session because I didn't want to sit there and just roll a bunch of dice to see how much money the tavern made or whatever for an entire session. But we did a bunch of that stuff. Then they were asked to go out and do some investigation of the Margrave. The druid character is the only person in the Emerald Enclave based out of Waterdeep that has had any success going into the Margrave and coming back. So they wanted him to go out and do some more exploration of the Margrave. He took the rest of the group, and that's when we started Challenge of the Fang. Challenge of the Fang is an interesting Kobold Press Tales of the Old Margrave storyline that is very much like dark, gritty D&D version of Little Red Riding Hood.
Sure.
Right? And so
I think, one of the Margrave adventures is exactly that, isn't it?
That is the adventure, yes.
Or it's like
that, yeah.
Goldilocks and the Three Bears or something.
Well, I don't know about that, but this one is specifically Little Red Riding Hood, and it's out of that book. So so it starts off like, hey, this injured horse runs up and there's a guy on its back that's died of old age, and he's got a gleaming silver axe. And I threw in some extra things just to make it more. There were some wolf reaver dwarves that were running around because I combined a random encounter with the opening encounter. And one of the characters that hadn't had a lot of spotlight time, of course, is the first one to grab that axe. And if you are holding the axe during the actual challenge that only happens once every 3 generations, which it is during that time, then you make a wisdom save or you're Geist to go on this challenge, right? So now all of a sudden, this character who hadn't had much spotlight time is Geist and has a quest, and everybody else is like, all right, cool, we don't mind like tromping around the forest and doing challenges and beating dwarves or beating wolves, because that's the whole thing. It's civilization versus the dwarves, and whoever wins the challenge every 3 generations has primacy, has dominance in the Margrave for the next 3 generations. And so they go through it. First they go through a giant forested hedge maze, and you have to pass 3 challenges. They completely failed one of the challenges because it's sort of like these dryad characters sort of trying to tempt them and whatever. And the trick is, like, you have to be respectful. You have to spend time with them and talk to them, but not too much time, or else they waste a lot of your time or whatever. And the players did the normally very smart thing of like, yeah, no, we're not going to talk to you. We have a mission to do. Like, thanks for the offer, but we're not going to hang out here. We got to keep going. It's like, okay, but you didn't know it, but that was one of the 3 challenges, and you just didn't even participate. So depending on how many challenges they succeed at, that determines the timing of when they show up at the old woman's hut. The old woman sort of being the stand-in for grandmother, right? The character who picked up and attuned to the axe is, of course, the woodsman. And they're going off to rescue this old farmer's daughter who they met in the tavern. Her name is Servonia, and she's, of course, running around in a red cloak. And they get word eventually that there is, there is the would-be king of the wolves running around, which is, of course, the big bad wolf. Who has the ability, it's basically a humanoid wolf creature that has the ability to swallow whole, and if it's got somebody in its belly, it has access to all of their spells, and so it swallows, the old woman's already been swallowed by the time they get there. And ultimately, like, I did some things in there that was interesting for the players, like the big bad wolf ended up being vaguely reminiscent of something from one character's backstory. He remembered, he broke out of in his pre-game backstory, he broke out of a prison in the middle of a fog while there was carnage going on, and he saw one of the creatures that was involved in the carnage is sort of silhouette in the fog. And so I'm like, oh, well, this creature looks like that silhouette that you saw. Is it the same one? Is it similar? Who knows? But that was a thing, right? And then there's a point before they get to grandmother's house where they find the Red Riding Hood's campground. And she's like, and it's got like this ring of like creepy dolls sitting around it in a circle. That just sort of, because people use these dolls as proxy sacrifices to the forest, and then the forest has like brought them all here and lined them up. And I decided that since my Margrave has been attached to Barovia for most of time, I decided that, of course, some of those dolls are Blinksy dolls, right, from Curse of Strahd. Mm-hmm. So I threw some of that in just so I could start, getting them used to the idea of creepy dolls that say, "It's no fun, it's no Blinksy."
Those are so great,
right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, I felt like we got to the end of that adventure, and they defeated the big bad wolf, and I felt like the end. I don't know. The end felt a little anticlimactic to me. Like they'd gone through all of these challenges, they'd done all this stuff, and then you had a big wolf thing that survived like 2, maybe 3 rounds. In a small little spot, so it wasn't even much of a tactical map situation, or the spells barely came up because it only had a couple of rounds to do anything. So yeah, I felt like that the conclusion was a little anticlimactic, but we still had some time at that point. So they had already received, while they were in the inn before they went on to the challenges, I'd used the hook for Curse of Strahd of the one character coming in with a message for them. Here's a letter from the burgomaster of Barovia. He needs your help, and then he buys around for everybody and leaves. And they're like, we got to start just killing anybody who decides to show up with a mysterious message, because that never goes well for us, right?
Well, it's not the messenger's fault,
right?
I mean.
And so
Strahd, but
yeah, and so so they finished up the challenge of the Fang, and they immediately just took off straight along the path they needed to get to Barovia, not realizing that they had already switched to Barovia. The mist rolled through the previous night while they were in the inn, and I described the mist and that guy coming through, and I even described the one warlock character is was it Celestial Warlock or whatever, Angelic or whatever that warlock build is, right?
Yeah.
And the patron is the same, because that's also the Asimar, so the patron is the same as the guardian angel sort of thing, and he has a flaw where he hears voices, and we've been playing it off as he hears her voice every now and then, but he's also recently been having one of the dark powers of Ravenloft sort of whispering in his head sometimes and tempting him, and so I described as you go through the fog, or as the fog rolls through that night, you have this conversation with the voice in your head, because he doesn't even know it's an angel. He just thinks it's a voice in his head. So you had this conversation with the voice in your head, and she said, you're going somewhere where I cannot follow. Make sure you stay true and whatever, right? So I laid all the groundwork that they were already in Barovia and just didn't know it. Right? They think that the way you get to Barovia, you can only get to Barovia through the Margrave, but then you could exit the same way. They don't realize that you and the forest whole have been just transported into this place. But they're figuring that out now, because I also moved Trollskull Manor there, and the publisher of the Waterdeep Wazoo was in drinking that night and got transported as well, so I can keep publishing the weekly newsletter that they like getting. And so the last newsletter they got was oh crap, what happened? We're suddenly in the forest. Where'd the city go? So they're getting a hunch that something has happened, right? So now they're in Barovia. They went through the big gates. They got into the town. Of course, like happens, the first place they went was the tavern. They met Ismark. The paladin in the group is I got to go check out this church. They went up to the church. They know that something's weird going on, because the church has the son in the basement screaming because he's a vampire spawn and hasn't eaten in a year. But they sort of talked about it, and the paladin's trying to, but we can all rise up and team up together. And it's yeah, no, we don't have any faith that'll work. And I actually played it out that the paladin's mother was actually in Barovia and has died. Her spirit, of course, couldn't leave because souls can't leave, but her soul has now joined with his magical weapon, which I've planned on sort of growing the way you talked about having a weapon grow with him. This weapon is going to grow with him and turn into the Sun Sword from Curse of Strahd. But it's his mother's blade originally, and her soul is trapped in it. She was an Asimar follower of Lathander, right? So it all sort of makes sense. But they just sort of abandoned the son in the vampire spawned son in the basement, and followed Ismark back to the manor, to the mansion, whatever, and that's where we stopped. Right? They haven't gone in, they haven't met Arena or any of that. So So that's sort of where we left off, right? We just got right into the beginning of Barovia. I think they're really hooked into Barovia. I've laid in all these ties to Curse of Strahd with them earlier on in the campaign, and so they all immediately showed up and said, "Hey, have you heard of any like temples?" Because one of them is specifically looking for the Ember Temple, and where are the holy places in this land? So they're all asking these questions very pointedly about their specific goals, and so far it's going pretty well. The only question I had to ask was going to be about player versus player, PC versus PC stuff, and we already sort of talked that up a lot, and I imagine significantly over time. So the timer went off a while ago, and I know Mike's got to get going pretty soon anyway. So I think that's where I wrap up, unless you all have questions.
No, it's interesting. So I ran a Margrave game. I have a irregular Margrave game. I think the last time we played was Halloween. And then we just got into it again, and everyone's like, man. And I had this wonderful, like, who wants to tell about the last game? And they're all like, and I go, the Forest of Margrave has stolen the memories out of your mind. You don't even remember where you were.
Perfect.
And I read through the adventures, and I remember reading the Little Red Riding Hood adventure, and I'm like, man, I don't want to run that. I was like, you know what? I'm doing my own, and it's going to be Seven Samurai, my new go-to.
See, I read that, and I'm like, oh, that is easily like my favorite one. And then I was kind of disappointed that it ended on such an anticlimax. But
fairy tales, come on. So,
I was curious, like, how long is it going to take them to figure out what's going on?
Yeah.
But as soon as the one character grabbed the axe and got the geas, like, he also got visions. And I described a young girl in a red cloak, and they had just fought a bunch of wolves, and they're like, "Wait a minute!" And they're like, "Oh, well, that took like 3 seconds." So.
I ran undead shadow fae who were attacking a village that had thwarted them many years earlier, and they had to figure out how to defeat the town.
I ran the first adventure in there as well, and that went really well.
I really like the first one. I love that headhunting,
the
crazy.
Hollow Man. I did the Fingers of Dorinde. That's not really an adventure; it's a location, but I used that once, and that went pretty well too. So, all right. Nothing else, Sam. You've been quiet. You got anything to say, or are you just busy talking to people in the chat?
Yeah, I had my microphone off because I was typing to people in the chat, so we've been having a good conversation.
Nice. Well, I would go to some chat room questions, but we're already over an hour, and I know people have places to go. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. So if you want to reach out to me, you can email thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can tweet at thetomeshow. I am personally at Squatch. It's all on the screen for those of you watching the video or the stream. Mike is at Sly Flourish. Sam is at DM Samuel. Mike has a Kickstarter coming out in a month or so. Do you want to talk about that real quick before we go?
Nope.
No? I'm giving you a chance to promote.
Keep watching the feed.
All right. Well, Mike has a Kickstarter coming out in about a month.
I do. I have a Kickstarter coming out soon.
Keep watching the feed.
Being a couple of good folk.
That's right. So keep an eye out for that. It's going to be fantastic. I think I've backed every Kickstarter you've done, and I haven't been disappointed yet. So.
Yeah, you'll like this one.
All right, perfect. All right, well then I think we're going to call it good then. So say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Bye, guys.